thank you for the opportunity to participate. There's actually not a great deal that I can really add in terms of the principles, other than to share what we're experiencing in the citrus industry. So as Gerard said, just a sense of what's happening on the ground when it comes to how these policies are actually getting rolled out. So just really my sort of plan is just to share how the world trade has changed, because we need to see it in that context, and then just obviously just go through a lot of the detail that people have already shared. I'm not going to go into that again, but just reflecting on that, how it impacts on the citrus industry, and what do we see the future looking like in that sense. Just a cautionary note here. I have been some talks I've done before, people told me I came across as not really being that sympathetic to climate change and really needing to pursue sustainability topics. I can tell you that's contrary to what I believe fundamentally, but also what we're actually trying to do. The point is, and it was highlighted, the Green Deal is a political statement, really, more than it is about actual what happens on the ground. And I think there's a massive gap that has developed between what's happening at a political, economic level and real, true sustainability movement. And you can see the complexity and why it's difficult to bridge this gap when you think of the slow progress that's coming out of the COP type discussions. You know, it's taken years and years to actually get to real, tangible movement on sustainability because it's influenced by politics and trade. So that's a cautionary note. The other thing I want to talk about is really the starting point for me when I started to think about this is a process that I went through in about 2008 when we got a letter out of Russia to indicate that the Russians requested the Department of Agriculture at that time to sign off on a letter regarding MRLs. And I was duly sent off to Moscow to find out what the hell's going on there, and why this letter sort of popped out of the blue. And so we found ourselves in this state room with a delegation of the Russians on that side and our South African delegation, and we started to interact. We put forward what did this letter mean. And we were working with a local translator, and so the discussion went to and fro. We asked them initially what it was about, and then they proceeded for about 20 minutes to indicate what this letter meant. And they would sort of talk for a minute or two, and our translator would respond. And over the course of the time, it just became so apparent how this whole picture fitted together. We initially went there thinking we'd just been caught in the crossfire, there's been a mistake, there's been some... But we realized after going through that process that the Russian authorities there had put this whole mechanism together to create an unbelievably powerful lever to influence trade. And the background story to that was just about the time when the Russians were trying to enter the WTO and trying to exert some influence, political influence over that process. And yes, we were being caught in the crossfire. And some of the reality of this is that the Russians themselves, the Europeans themselves were part of the target of that. And it really hurt European producers. They lost millions of rand, and that trade basically stopped almost instantly with Russia. The point I'm simply trying to make is that in this mix of mixing the science and the trade dynamics around MRLs, which were very well explained this morning, and the economics and politics, is that you have a very powerful tool. And this is part of my concern a little bit with the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy. It's a very powerful tool. And hopefully I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the intent, because really at the heart of it, we have to understand what are they trying to do. Is it about sustainability, true sustainability, or are we going to get caught up in some of this other aspect of economics and politics, which will really hurt us potentially? Obviously, people have spoken about this a lot this morning in terms of the association between the Farm to Fork strategy and the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy. Just to add a few numbers to that, it's worth about 387 billion, this current cap, which runs until 2027, which works out about 6.4 million rand. So that means out of the taxpayer's pocket, every year European farmers are going to get 2 and a bit times the South African GDP. That's the quantum of funds that are being purely pumped into the farmers' pockets, and it's completely bypassing the price-setting mechanism for commodities. So in other words, it doesn't matter how much they produce, they still get the subsidy, and obviously that obviously has trade. It's not the free market sort of view. Also coming from an agricultural economist point of view, so another one up here at the moment, but you're obviously not allocating resources then efficiently because there's a skewing of sort of funds getting channeled back to farmers. The other really significant thing about the cap that's been implemented in this round is that it is very closely associated with the Green Deal and farm to fork requirements in terms of lower pesticides, lower inputs from fertilizer, etc. So what we're seeing currently, and there's been the odd demonstration already from European growers, they're struggling to actually meet these targets themselves and access those subsidies, so their on-farm incomes are also getting impacted by this. So just getting a bit closer to how we see sort of things panning out and how in the citrus industry we're observing the farm-to-fork strategy. The problem, Gerrit, with taking it from a policy level to what we actually think will happen on the ground, the challenge with that is it's an incoherent policy in the sense that it has been influenced by the politics and economics, and it's not just about the science. So if we look at some of those objectives around reducing plant protection products, well, potentially that's directly opposed to market access and trade. Now, remember, Europe's own trade has expanded significantly, exporting as well. So if we're talking reciprocating, that's a massive aspect that they need to take into account. Their ability to actually access other markets is also going to be influenced. You then look at what the impact would be on waste, and Kobus has touched on that. We've got that dynamic, increase in waste, and that's the quickest way to actually increase your impact on the environment if you have high levels of waste. Obviously, it links to improved incomes. Obviously, that getting tainted. So if you're not delivering that high quality product Kobus is talking about, has impact on incomes. Obviously, there's the food safety aspect, and that, it just goes on. What the point I'm trying to raise here is that all these aspects are actually potentially pulling in different directions. And from a practitioner's point of view, it's really difficult to see where the end goal is going to be. Which force is actually going to predominate and prevail and put you in a position where you know where you're going to land. Some sectors, for example, the citrus industry, quite a long time ago, took decisions about how to protect fruit post-harvest. So our strategy, this is going back even as early as the 90s, was to use post-harvest treatments, the typical chemicals that we have in pack houses today, and rely less on packaging material to do that. Look, it does depend on obviously the type of product that you're dealing with, but that was a strategic decision many years ago. It means we're in a better position perhaps now from a circular economy point of view, but there's still this massive pressure to do it. So those are long-term type decisions which could be disrupted now just because of these immediate goals coming through with the farm-to-fork strategy. But it's really challenging trying to predict exactly where the future will be with all this uncertainty. So the points have been made. This is just another sort of emphasis on it. The Green Deal and farm-to-fork strategy is very much influenced by politics, and this slide just shows you the percentage of green parties that are essentially ruling member states, and this is probably not even the full picture in the sense that coalitions and other parties are influencing the decisions at a member state level. And this is obviously what the consumer wants, the population, so that we understand. We don't have any objections to it, but it does mean green economy is forming part of the political thinking. Again, to make the point, the issues aren't so much the Green Deal or the farm to fork strategy, if it's good science and good, the objectives are noble. It's when the political aspect gets into play. And so what we have now is basically we're living through the consequence of decisions taken a number of years ago. And Lindy referred to this in terms of the current regulations around pesticide authorization and MRL setting. Within the last decade, the process of MRL setting or the formalization of it now takes a political step. It has to go to Parliament to be ratified. That was actually a fundamental shift in the way regulations were determined in Europe. And we can see that now where again, politics are deliberately having an influence over the final outcomes. It's not just science-based, it's not just the technocrats dealing with it, it's the politicians also having their influence. This was an interesting article that came out not so long ago. It was labeled, this is on the European Parliament website, pesticides in food, what is the European Parliament doing to help? Okay. How do you understand that statement? What do you think the article is about? Do you think it's there to help the producer or the consumer get lower residues, more residues, lower use of crop protection products? But it goes on, obviously, to talk a little bit about details of what they're trying to do, and it is obviously in line with the strategies of the Farm to Fork strategy of reducing the amount of active ingredients that are used, and they throw in what I think, like a statement, they're doing this because of potentially the renewal of actives like glyphosate. Now, I'm not making any judgments on active substances here, but it just tells you how involved the politicians are on a very technical and scientific topic. Interestingly there, if you look at that second paragraph, I'll turn to now, the sustainable use of pesticides, they do refer to integrated pest management. Now, if they were following it exactly how Kobus was saying, I can't see how they can have that broader statement, what are we using, what is the Parliament doing to help, if they're meaning just simply lower residues. What was also interesting, obviously, this is just another slide just talking about how they're essentially going to the member state level. So what they were finding with this, basically the substitution principle that they've applied here is at the European level, they'd obviously agreed to make some commitments to lower pesticide use and push that down to member state level to actually implement. That was the sustainable use of pesticide regulation, which came in about 2009 as well. Practically for 10 years, there's been not a great deal of progress on that regulation, and it's just being reviewed now, and the policy review is happening now. The point is, and this is here, the findings of this impact assessment is that member states themselves are really struggling to comply with the expectation of lower residues. Again, this is the anomaly and paradox that comes in. You've got all these opposing forces. Yes, it's a good idea, but what actually happens on the ground? And that makes it really tricky to be a third country trying to predict where to go. So what can we understand from reciprocation? What does that mean? Is it a like for like in the sense that you're simply trading off ideas, that if Europe sets a target for 50% lower residue, does that mean we've got to do the same? Is that exactly how it works? Or are we going to be trying to pursue more traditional ways of negotiating trade where yes, you might want to see give and take on both sides, but it's not a perfect match. And obviously, when it comes to things like integrated pest management, which is site-specific, pest and disease-specific, you can't be doing an exact match. It simply doesn't work, and that's why the argument that if it's not authorized in Europe, means countries outside of Europe can't use it. That argument it falls flat if you really take IPM seriously. Okay, just getting a little bit onto where we see the challenges with if we were to reciprocate an exact like-for-like situation. Obviously, increased organic is in the citrus industry is almost impossible, mainly because of the number one challenge, and I emphasize it again, raised by my colleague over there, Sean Moore, it's the phytosanitary requirements. If you want to access the market from a phytosanitary point of view, you have to control that particular disease or pest, and hence you have to have the control options. It is our number one challenge, and unfortunately, started out as an optimist and have a little bit more experience now when it comes to some of the phytosanitary dynamics at play. But sometimes, the facts just don't carry weight, and it's not that they're not reliable or good. In fact, to the contrary, but they are pushed aside or ignored, and that's a problem for us. I mean, and that's part of the challenge in terms of what we need to think about in terms of our messaging and getting to the right ears. Obviously, reduction in the use of synthetic inputs, maybe fertilizers may or may not, we could cope with that, but again, it's linked to proper tree health, which Corbus has raised. When we look at the reduction of hazardous pesticides, again, which member state do you actually follow? Because and I'll come back to sort of maybe organic, if you look at the rate of uptake of organic, even within member states, it varies significantly. So when you reciprocate, who are you trying to follow there? Yes, they've got targets, but are we looking for actual reciprocation in terms of matching them to what they can achieve, or are they expecting us to be even higher than that in terms of their ideal goals? I mentioned on the circular economy different strategies for packaging material. Unfortunately, in the citrus industry, that's not such a big challenge for us, but obviously on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, we're watching that very closely. And that does go back where you really need good science. Fortunately, in the fruit industry, we've got the Confronting Climate Change project, and that's looking at that very closely to try and prepare our industry for that aspect, as well as the local carbon tax requirements. And then obviously looking at redressing biodiversity. Again, that may or may not be a challenge for us, depending on how they're looking at redressing it. Okay, just looking at some of the uncertainties and trying to just flesh that out. Again, I pointed out the pesticide candidates for substitution. We haven't really seen even the European member states making great progress there. Are they pushing us hard to take that out? And I said, which member states are we expected to follow? Because there is quite a lot of variation in how they're approaching it. In terms of one thing that we've started within the citrus industry is there's actually two institutions that we've linked up. The one that we've started internally is the Citrus Sustainability Forum. We started at the beginning of last year, and that's the platform where we're trying to get as many stakeholders together to talk about these issues and try to prepare for that future. The other one I've been involved with is the Southern Hemisphere Association of Fresh Fruit Exporters. They've got a sustainability task group. And SHAFE is made up of our Southern Hemisphere counterparts. That's Peru, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Australia, New Zealand. And we're trying to interpret these new requirements coming out of Europe and what it will mean for the Southern Hemisphere. So there's definitely anecdotal stories and some facts in terms of how we respond. And it could tie in very closely with the work being done by CropLife. What was interesting is being part of that process is just how we define sustainability and what it actually means from a cultural and society point of view, and obviously the impact of trade for communities living in rural areas. It was a theme that came through very strongly from that process. And obviously there's an aspect that you can't impose things from outside the country, especially if there's a very different context and climate in that space. So the point is, we're dealing with different issues, and to try to have a one-size-fits-all just simply doesn't work. Evidence-based decisions, of course, going back to the climate and carbon trading, that type of aspect, and how we need to make progress in that, but you need good science, and the jury's still out in some of those areas. If Europe is only going to use EFSA as the only source of information, then we will have some challenges, definitely. We've seen that on the phytosanitary side, that you can have science from both angles, and if they're only going to be predominantly using the one, that's problematic. And then obviously one of the other stated goals in the Farm to Fork strategy is improving environmental standards. That's immediately obviously assuming that the European ones are perhaps better, and what we found at a very practical level through CESA and some of the other standards that we've had to roll out is that when you try and impose that from Europe, it's not that relevant at times and not that applicable. So it's a negotiation. It needs to be shared, that type of work, especially when it comes to how you demonstrate it or create the transparency in the system, and that's where the costs lie. Some of the models that have been adopted in Europe are very expensive, and that actually gets in the way of people doing the right thing on farms. Okay, so just kind of in summary and sort of getting to some of the real challenges, it is very difficult to see what the future looks like. I mean, in terms of what we're discussing in our sustainability forum, we've got different topics there, but we tend to be finding ourselves waiting for the next step, the latest indication out of Europe. Exactly how do they interpret or how do they see it happening? So as much as we're trying to prepare for it, it's very difficult while there's uncertainty. The other thing that was mentioned this morning, and Lindy is sort of also raised, I mean, we do need to find mechanisms where we can have proper inputs into the processes. It does feel like the European Union has decided already and now sort of pushing that out, whereas it would have been much better if there was some form of engagement before then. We can really get into the detail and then come up with a joint solution. A bit like Prof. Jooster's policy thing. I mean, that would have been great if we'd had that opportunity earlier. It was also mentioned we've got very little financial resources. I mean, many industries are on their knees right now, and there's just, unfortunately, environmental and social type work doesn't happen very quickly when there's no extra money to work on that. So, from a genuine sustainability point of view, environmental sustainability, we're quite concerned about that. And as also been highlighted, the next phase is really now bolting on these requirements. So if I go back to that Russian example where I started with, essentially what the Russians were looking to do was get the Department of Agriculture to sign that memorandum of understanding. So they were reducing their intentions to an agreement which has to be signed, and basically there was little choice. You had to sign that agreement. And everybody basically did. The problem was they had very few MRLs at the time, so you were almost admitting that you were going to struggle. It put you in a very difficult position. So that's kind of the reality of kind of where we find ourselves in now. We're almost being compelled to sign up to this agreement we've never really had a chance to influence, and that's I think what the reality we're facing now on the ground and in the citrus industry. Thanks, Gert. That's just a final thing from Cape Town. So obviously we've crossed the globe from Russia to Brussels to Cape Town, and I just want to confirm the points being made in terms of we do need to communicate, cooperate, and have genuine concern for sustainability topics. Thank you.